Okay, let's optimize the camera and render settings before we actually start playing around with the lighting. So I'm pressing Shift F to enter the first person mode, and I'm trying to find the angle that I like. And in the performance tab, I'm going to change the start resolution from 64 to 512 to make the viewport render a little bit more responsive when you change the properties of the shader or move the camera, because at 64 it gets a little bit too noisy. I also set the render samples and the preview samples to 100 just to get a slightly clearer picture. We don't need the super high values here. And the bounces, let's set it to a lower value. Actually, let's set it to 0. And the diffuse, glossy, and transmission to 2, maybe transmission to 4. We'll need this diffuse, glossy, and transmission bounces when we increase maximum and minimum bounces for the final render. I'm going to leave the refractive and reflective caustics enabled and set the filter glossy to 1 to reduce the noise produced by reflected rays, by glossy rays I should say. Let's now go to the environment, settings, and enable multiple important sampling, just like we did in another scene. Let's set it to 1024 or maybe even higher, 2048. Here you can see how this little trick really helps to get rid of the fireflies and noise in general. Alright, cool, so we have these multiple important samples enabled. What I'm going to do next is come over to the render settings and change the aspect ratio. Right now it's 1912 by 1080. I'm going to reduce the X to something like 784. Yeah, set it exactly like this. 784. Yeah, this is the right number, definitely. Alright, so I framed this clock this way, and the next thing that I want to do is set the focal length to something like 50 to reduce the perspective distortion and to make it more like a portrait shot, because apparently we are creating the portrait style type of render. And the next thing I will do is set up some kind of depth of field. So let's add first the empty object, plane axis. This is an invisible object that will help us to set up the exact distance for the depth of field effect. I'm renaming this to camera focus. Now let's select the active camera, go over to the camera settings, and now you can increase the size. That will make the whole image blurred, but no worries, we're gonna fix this in a moment. You can tweak the distance parameter and try to eyeball it. But we have this empty object and we'll use it in a moment. But first of all, I'm going to increase this size further. And now let's click here and choose camera focus. The depth of field set up this way will help us to concentrate the efforts on the clock itself and kind of remove the background and make it less important. And after we did it, next thing we can do is start actually tweaking the lighting. Before we get started, let's take a moment and talk about why we have this basic material setup. Why not a simple gray material, after all? Sure, we can set up a material override, which will apply the gray material, for example, to all objects, but this will have its own drawbacks. For example, we won't be able to preview the reflective component of the shaders. So we can set up the material override, click on this preview button in the viewport. But the problem of using this gray material to preview the lighting is that it won't represent the final material really well. It won't represent the interaction between light and material. Look at this, here I'm changing the rotation of the HDRI environment, but the shifts in lighting are not so obvious because of that perfectly diffuse material and more or less ambient type of lighting in the HDRI. So let's remove this material override. Generally speaking, I would recommend setting up the basic materials before even trying to set up the lighting. It won't take much time, but it will represent the final result much better. Especially under the certain lighting conditions where the reflection plays a big role in the final image. For example, if you have the glass or metal parts in your scene, which are expected to catch the reflection, and we wouldn't be able to test the lighting to set up the image-based lighting in any meaningful way without being able to see the reflection. So that's something to think about when setting up lighting, and let's take a look at the basic shaders. Let's switch to the object mode in the node editor, and here you can see that we have a simple mixed shader, which is composed of diffuse shader, glossy shader, and they are mixed using freemium. Nothing really special here, and let's talk a bit about the Fresnel effect. Let's use our hero DAC to demonstrate the effect. I love this DAC, and we are trying to incorporate it into our tutorials, into every tutorial, because it's so yellow, so cool. Alright, so what is this Fresnel effect? Here we have the diffuse shader. Let's hit Shift A, go shader, and add the mix shader first. Drop it over here and press Shift A again, add a glossy shader. The DAC is a boss. The DAC is awesome. So let's drag the glossy shader into the second socket of the mix shader. And now we can, of course, interpolate between diffuse and glossy and all that stuff. You can find it in the input, Fresnel. And what it does when we use it as a mix factor between these two shaders, it makes the reflection appear only on a glancing angle, like this. So really nothing extraordinary here. We can tweak the index of refraction to manipulate the fall-off of this effect. And that, I think, is pretty much everything we need to know about the Fresnel effect. What's really important for us is that this effect will help us to preview the lighting, and that's it. Especially if the relationships between the camera, the objects, and the light source create this kind of scenario in which the reflection starts to play a prominent role, like you see here. So for example, if we have a large reflective surface on which we're looking at a glancing angle, setting up some basic shaders which involve Fresnel effect and glossy component makes sense. And if it makes sense, DAC is happy with it. Let's now get back to our image-based lighting workflow, no more DACs. Let's jump into the environment tab and hit dot on the numpad to bring back the nodes into view. And let's zoom in a bit. Now what we can do is start tweaking the rotation of the environment. Let's start with the Z-axis. Let's hold Shift for a finer control and let's click on this value. In a moment we'll be rotating the environment image a lot. And what we can also do is increase the strength of the environment, set it to 3 for example. But definitely it will make the brightest spots fall outside the visible range. And we have talked about this already. That happens because of the render transform that cuts, that clips these extremely intensive spots. And to fight it, we have to switch to the filming log encoding base. This will give us a wider color range to play with. And let's also choose the base contrast to bring back some contrast, and voila, now we can see the details in the highlights. And that is something. And of course, you can push the strength of the environment even further, but I will stick to a lower value like 3. Now let's go ahead and explore some other options of what we can do with our HDRIs. Namely, we can rotate, transform, and distort them by changing the location. But also we can click on the X-axis and hold Shift for final control and drag it to the right. And that will tilt the HDRI on the X-axis. And we can do the same with the Y-axis. And that's already looking very interesting. And what we can also do is click and drag down, then click left or right to change all 3 values simultaneously. Or maybe you don't want to change 3, you can change 2. That's almost as fun as 3. The next thing that I want to show you is location. And actually, if you tweak the location, you distort the environment. That's a bit unpredictable, and I don't use this very often. But I guess in some cases, like if you're trying to make a non-photorealistic render, that may come in handy. The effect after changing these values can be a little bit on the extreme side. So if you, for example, set the Z value to 8.6, we'll get this stylized look, which may be good or bad depending on what you're trying to do. Okay guys, that's looking awful. That's not what we are trying to do with our image-based lighting, but interesting to know anyway. Let's click and drag and zero that values out. Let's also zero out the rotation. Gone. Now we have this blank canvas of lighting on which we can paint whatever we want. I like this. Alright guys, we can now go ahead and continue setting up the image-based lighting. And the first thing that I will do is click and drag on that interface border to kind of give ourselves a little bit more space to work with. Okay, that looks nice. And yet another thing that I will do is click open and choose the 2K version of this glass passage HDR. Who knows, maybe you would like to remove the depth of field effect. 2000 pixels is better than 1, isn't it? And for a moment I will hide the second layer by holding Shift and clicking on this layer. So yet another thing that we'll be using quite often is RGB curves. Let's see how it works. Press Shift A, go color, RGB curves, and drop it in. If you used Photoshop at least once, you know how it works. So if you click and drag, you create a point, and you can drag it up to make the image brighter, and drag it down. Or maybe if you want to create a little bit more contrast, you can create this S-shaped curve, which will effectively crank up the highlights and make the darker tones darker. And of course, we can tweak the individual channels like a green channel the same way. So we'll be using the RGB curves node quite often. What I will do next is play around with the rotation of the HDRI to start developing look and feel of the lighting. It's a very, very artistic, very quick way to test different ideas because it works kind of randomly. You get different results each second. Here I'm rotating the HDRI on the x-axis. I think it's already looking nice, and what I like to do is think of image-based lighting in terms of 3-point lighting. So here I'm trying to find the tasty angle for the key light, and I think we got it, as well as the fill light. So we can set up 2 lights out of 3, if we think about it in terms of 3-point lighting. What I'm going to do next is add this Mix RGB node. Press B, drag the selection rectangle around this set of nodes, then press Shift D to duplicate it. This will be our second HDRI environment. Let's hook it up to the second socket of the Mix RGB node. Click Open on the image texture and select some other HDRI. For example, Parking Garage by Greg Zal. Click Open. What this node allows us to do is blend between these 2 environments. We can set it to 1 to show only the second environment, or to 0, or to something in between. But for now, I'll set it up to 1 to show only the second HDRI. Okay, in the bottom left window, I will open the UV image editor and open this new texture just to preview it, or maybe for no particular reason. Okay, now what we can do is start rotating the second HDRI, just like we did with the first one. But this time I will be searching for the rim light, and I think we got something similar to rim light. Actually, it's amazing how fast you can scrub through the different looks, how fast you can test the different moods by using these image-based lighting techniques. This is completely mind-blowing. You just rotate the HDRI and you get a bunch of different ideas instantly. It's like an instant fun button. So we have set up something like an edge light, or a kicker light, or a rim light. And what we can do now is change the blending mode of the Mix RGB node to Add. That will allow us to combine these 2 environments together. Now we can tweak the mix factor to control the proportion in which they are mixed together. Let's now try to compare the results before and after adding the second HDRI. This is how it looks just with 1 environment. And ta-da! This is how it looks with 2 environments mixed together. And we got everything we need. The key light, or the dominant light, the fill light, and the rim light, just by rotating some images. That's crazy, isn't it? Okay, but the background looks kind of weird. What we can do about that is add a mix shader right after the background shader. Now I'm pressing Shift D to duplicate the background shader and hook it up to the second socket of the mix shader. The idea behind all these shenanigans that you will see in a moment is that we want to replace the background without affecting the lighting. And we can do it by going Input, Light Path, and adding it in. Now pick the camera ray output, drag it over here. This means that we'll use the camera rays to mix between 2 sets of HDRIs. For example, if we change now the color of this background shader to a darker shade of gray, well, basically we've just separated the background color from the light rays. Now we can tweak these things separately without them affecting each other. One more thing that I'd like to do is organize these nodes a little bit. So I'm gonna add in the frame, resize it so it encapsulate all the nodes over here. Press N to open the right tool shelf. Maybe select the color of this frame. Change the label size to make it a little bit more readable. I'm going to set it to 60 and I'm going to call the label background, because these are the nodes that separate the background from the lighting. And now I'm going to press B, draw the selection rectangle around these nodes. Press Shift P to automatically draw the frame around them. Again, press N to open the right tool shelf, call it HDRI 01. And by the way, to be able to do this Shift P trick, you need to have the node Wrangler Dawn enabled. And I'll do the same thing for the second set of nodes, for the second HDRI. And now it looks very sleek and very organized. And if we abandon this project for a couple of years, then go back, we would be able to decipher what's going on. What is this spaghetti monster? And the next thing we can do is replace the plain color background with something more interesting. I'm selecting these nodes from HDRI 01 group. Then I'm pressing Ctrl C to copy and Ctrl V to paste. And I'm including it into the background frame and hook it up into the color socket of the second background, obviously. And while it's not physically correct at all, it gives us a little bit more freedom, artistic freedom, so we can control the background separately. I'm going to tweak the colors using the RGB curves adjustment. I think we can make it darker to make the main subject pop. But better yet, we can rotate the HDRI to try to get more appealing background. And I'm going to set the strength to 2, or maybe to 1. Now we can start rotating the environment, just like we did previously. This is a very intuitive process in this workflow. Let's zero out the rotation, and let's try rotating on the Z-axis. Okay, that looks already really awesome. I like how lamps got the bokeh effect from the depth of field. And that looks pretty good to me. What else we can do is, for example, increase the intensity of the blue channel for the background. And also I'm thinking about lowering the strength furthermore. Maybe set it to 0.8. And that's the basics of the image-based workflow. You have a bunch of HDRI environments, and you change the settings of the mapping node, and you change the colors, and you change some other things, and you get completely different results. You can test the different looks. Some other things worth mentioning is that you can press N in the UV image editor and then click View as Render. And then the changes to exposure will be reflected in this image. Okay, and what I also like to do to get a fresh view on what I'm doing at the moment is select the camera, set the pivot mode to active element, then press Ctrl M and X 2 times. And what this combo does is that it mirrors the camera horizontally. Now let's bring the glassy object back into scene by holding Shift and clicking on the second layer. And also I'm going to bring back the tool shelf. And I think it's about time to take a look at the render settings. Right now we have bounces set to 0, the maximum minimum bounces. Let's crank it up. We have a glass object here and we want it to be transparent. So I think 4 or maybe 5. Now 4 bounces will be enough to show the refraction in the glass material. Also I'm going to lower the diffuse and glossy bounces to 1 because we don't really need that second bounce. It really doesn't contribute to the overall impression very much, but it makes the render slightly longer. And I think we're entering the territory of microscopic tweaks. From now on, all the tweaks will be almost unnoticeable, but nevertheless very important. So let's get back to the first HDR. And what I'm doing, I'm still searching for the best angle for lighting. I'm still not sure that what we see is the best that we can get. So I'm trying to tweak here and there some things. For example, what I'm trying to do here is tweak the second HDRI to make it a little bit warmer. In other words, to create a little bit of a complementary contrast going on between the cool tone of the first environment and a slightly hotter look of the second one. What we can do is intensify the red channel to give the light a more orangey tint. And what else we can do is deal with the green channel. Okay, that looks nice, and it's never too late to rotate the HDRI. So let's click on the Z axis and just see what we can get. It's wonderful how unexpected can be the result during this workflow. For example, here we have a very nice lighting idea. Very nice. Let's try something different, because I really want to get this rim light going on. And I wonder, have you noticed that this image-based workflow is basically going back and forth between rotating HDRIs and tweaking the colors? It's easy peasy, yeah? You just get into this flow and you tweak settings and you get amazing results. And of course, you can anytime go back to the add mode and fine-tune the amount in which these two HDRIs are mixed. Alternatively, you can press M to mute this node, press M to toggle it back again. And when you're satisfied with what you see, you can select the camera, press Ctrl M and X 2 times again to restore the original view of the camera. Alright guys, so here's the first look that we managed to squeeze out of this image-based technique. Let's bring back that tool shelf and let's render it out. This way we'll be able to compare it later on with another looks and moods. So I'm setting the resolution to 100% and hitting the render button. It renders pretty fast and the noise levels are okay. And if you want to tweak the shaders or maybe add the textures, now is the right time to do it. So if this lighting workflow was a part of a bigger workflow to get a complete render, now it would be the time to assign some textures and all that stuff and get something like this. And by the way, you can find the two versions of the clock model in the project files. So you could see how it's set up, check it out by yourself and so on. Alright, awesome. Let's now go ahead and try setting up yet another lighting mood. What I'm going to do is use the same kind of tricks to rotate the HDRIs, tweak the colors and so on to get absolutely different mood. We can get started by removing the background for a moment. Let's hold Ctrl and drag across this line to remove it. And because we have set up the light path earlier, we have disconnected the background from actual illumination of the scene. And by background, I mean the background plate, obviously. And the second thing that I will do is mute the add node. I want to isolate the first environment and tweak it. The process is the same, let's just rotate the hell out of it. I'm holding Shift to tweak these values very smoothly. And okay, that looks cool. I got an idea. And now we can add a little bit of contrast by taking down this point in the RGB curves. And I think the lighting setup now leans toward the mysterious side. It has a slight Harry Potter vibe to it. Or maybe even Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. And so on and so on. That's magic. Okay, and if you have the node Wrangler tone enabled, you can select the add node, press Alt S to swap the inputs. You can see that right now this node is muted, and when we press Alt S to swap the inputs, we are previewing the second HDRI. So it's just a faster way of doing it without reconnecting the sockets. Again, here I'm not so sure what result do I want to get. I'm just looking at the image, and when I feel that it looks right, I stop. Definitely, this is a very artistic part of the whole workflow of the image-based lighting workflow. You're trying to find something and you aren't sure what it is. And the complexity, the amount of information stored in the HDRI environment, 360 degrees image is just mind-blowing. So you can literally get hundreds and hundreds of lighting ideas. And I think that dappled light looks very cool. Now we can press M to unmute the add node. And then hit Alt S to swap the inputs. But the mix factor is now set to 0. We can start from 0 and then take it up a bit. Let's do it right now. And but don't overdo it. It's a matter of finding balance, blah blah blah. Right, folks, that looks mysterious enough for me. Let's go back to tweaking the background plate. Reconnect the nodes, and now, Houston, we have a problem. The background and the lighting doesn't really align. First, I will take the strength of the background down to 0.2. Now we can try rotating it or even switch to some different image. Let's try the parking garage and hope that it will look more congruent. And let's try rotating on the y-axis or on any other axis because it doesn't matter much. And after some seemingly random tweaks based on personal preference, we'll get something like this. And it's not as bad as it could be, it's very mysterious, it's very moody. Again, this lighting scheme consists of two HDRIs that illuminate this object. Obviously, you can have many different environments illuminating your object, but I think it's better to concentrate on one or two environments because it can get very tricky very fast. Right, let's take a look at a few more different things related to image-based lighting. Here you can see that I've set up yet another mode, which consists of just one HDRI. It's more than enough to create this really cool looking ambient lighting. And we can make it even more ambient by tweaking the curve. By the way, this is Skylit Garage by Greg Zal. This section is from HDRIhaven.com. Check it out. Greg has an amazing collection of HDRIs, and you can even download the free versions. I think the maximum resolution of the free versions is 1024 pixels wide. For many cases, it's more than enough, especially if you will use the separate JPEG or whatever for the background plate. Okay, cool. And as we mentioned previously, we're using the Filmic render transform. It has a nice feature called false color. What it does is that it color codes the parts based on their intensity. The red color indicates the overly bright parts. You can use this information to maybe reduce the exposure or reduce the strength of the environment. One more thing that I did, I've chosen the low contrast profile to make it even more ambient. So this is an extremely ambient lighting example, but it also looks cool. Let's now take a look at some problems that may arise if you use the high dynamic range images to illuminate your 3D scene. Let's talk about noise and these fireflies that appear here and there, very hot bright pixels. One solution that comes to mind is to use the clump feature, but actually that will not only potentially reduce the noise but also kill all the high dynamic range data. Because if you clamp direct and set it to 0.1, you just set a brick wall for the brightness of the pixels. You limit it to 0.1. The same goes, of course, for clamping direct. Of course, it will help to reduce the speckles, but come on, it will collapse the luminosity range, and we don't want to do it. But anyway, here's a pretty noisy example where clamp is set to 0, which is the default value, and here is the image that is clamped, and the clamp value is set to 100. To some degree, it helps to solve the problem of noise, but it creates a bunch of other problems, like the mangled dynamic range. Let's try a different trick. Let's try to blur the original HDRI. Here I opened a fresh file in Blender. In the bottom window, I opened the node editor, the compositor, and enable checkbox use nodes. The next step is to import the image. Let's press Shift A and go Input, Image. Now open the problematic image that is causing the noise. Let's click on this preview and randomly choose the HDRI for testing. Let's choose, for example, parking garage. Done. And now we can hold Ctrl Shift and click on this node to open the viewer node. Alternatively, you can enable the backdrop checkbox and preview it right in the node editor. But I will disable it. And instead, in the UV image editor, open the viewer node. Next, we can apply some blur. So let's make some space, press Shift A, go Filter, Blur. Let's leave the type of the blur at Gaussian, is the default type. Toggle the relative checkbox, and now just click and drag on the X and Y values. That will blur the image, and I think that the value of 3% would be enough. So let's set it to 3. Now we can just go ahead and save the image, make sure we don't replace the original one, or just press F3. And because we're dealing here with the 32-bit images, we need to choose either Radiance HDR or OpenEXR. And the next crucial step would be to name this thing. So I will call it Super Awesome Blurred HDRI. Yeah, that will work. Yeah, it's so much better than some stupid generic name, boring. Okay, fantastic. And just to compare the potential improvement of the noise levels, here is the scene illuminated with the original HDRI, and here is the scene illuminated by the blurred HDRI, which of course has its own drawbacks like degradation of the highlights, but on some occasions it really helps to reduce the noise and fireflies. Alright folks, let's now move on to the final step of this tutorial. Let's post-process our render. So we have set up an amazing image-based lighting. What else we can do? First, let's render it out. We have set the samples to 800. Now let's press the render button. And the first thing we can do is play around with the RGB curves in the color management tab. Let's turn it on. Now you can click on this point or create additional points to influence the contrast of the whole image or of the individual color channels. And what I like about tweaking colors in color management tab is that we see the adjustments right in the viewport. And that, I should say, is pretty nice when you're developing the look and feel of your lighting. It gives us a nice opportunity to preview or to approximate the final look of the render before even hitting the render button. Yay for real-time techniques. I hope one day Blender will become a fully real-time application, just like the Unreal Engine. One day. Before that happens, we still have to render and to drink coffee while it's rendering. I'm a total coffee monster, so perhaps that's why I love rendering. No, actually, I don't love rendering. I love seeing the results in real time. Okay, so I disabled the curves adjustment. Let's try another thing. Let's open the node editor, switch to the compositor mode, enable use nodes. Then let's free some space for the additional nodes. Let's just drag this compositor node to the right, this to the left. Now we can press Shift A, go filter, and add a glare node. That's an obvious choice because we have a high dynamic range image illuminating the scene, and some parts of the image are extremely bright, and they will catch the glare. Let's choose the fog glow. This will be kind of a smooth glowing effect. I'm also setting the quality to high, and you can press M to disable this node and M to enable it back. This way we can easily check the difference before and after applying the effect. And maybe I'll switch it back to medium to just give a glow a larger area, so to speak. And also I set the mix to -0.3 to reduce the intensity of the effect. Now let's add the color balance node and drop it in here. And right after doing it, I will change the correction formula from lift gamma gain to offset power slope, because lift gamma gain doesn't work really well with the scene referred values, which are higher than 1. So when you change the offset value, you just influence the overall brightness, and you do it in a kind of a uniform way. And also you can click and drag on this color wheel to change the tint. One important thing about the offset is that it changes the black level. So ultimately it flattens the image, so use with caution. It also has this basis parameter which allows for negative values. So proceed with even more caution because it's kind of toxic. Let's now bring back to 0 and bring this one to the default value. The second one is power. You can use it to increase the contrast of the image or to colorize it or to do both. Under the hood, some interesting math happens. Colors are getting multiplied by themselves in a non-linear fashion, but it doesn't really matter for us here. Like Plato said, all we see is actually shadows on the walls of this cave. Okay, and final one is slope. We can make adjustments to slope to increase the exposure of the image or to colorize it while maintaining the contrast. So by changing the 3 parameters, offset, power, and slope, we can color grade the image without destroying the color data, because this node works really well with the high dynamic range data. And by the way, if you want to set the slope value really high, you can click on it and just type the numbers. We can set to 5, to 3, to 100, to whatever you want. So basically, that's what we can do with the color balance node. Just use the offset power slope instead of lift gamma gain and everything will be alright. Alright guys, and one more important thing before we can wrap it up is how we can export and import the ready-made environments for the production. So we have set up this image-based lighting, and I'm gonna call the environment world_A to just keep track of the world. And now let's go File, click on the Append, or just press Shift F1. Here I have a bunch of the blend files with the different settings, and I'm clicking on the B version. We have a couple of folders here, object, scene, etc. We need to open the world folder. And inside it, we'll see the world_B. This thing includes all the environment nodes. Let's click on it and click Append from library. And now we can quickly toggle between different worlds. Let's check it out. Click on this world icon. And in the drop-down list, let's select world_B. Done. And now we need to make sure that we don't lose this file on restarting Blender. So let's click on this F icon. This way we tell Blender to keep this file even if we change the environment. Let's do the same thing for the world_A. Then let's press this icon that says F on it. And now just imagine the possibilities. We can create the file that contains the whole bunch of different image-based lighting setups. And when you need to quickly test different looks, you just append the worlds from this file. So this was an insanely quick, but I hope exciting crash course on the image-based lighting in Blender. And if you have already got the access to this freemium course on Gumroad, you can download all the project files. Just follow the link in the email that Gumroad has sent to you, and you will end up on this page. Click the download button near the project files, and after that it's just a matter of unzipping this archive. Just right click, extract here. I guess this part will be pretty obvious. And now you can just open Blender and open this clock_model_01A blend file or any other blend files included in this package. Feel free to experiment with it, try the image-based lighting and see how cool it is. I'm really looking forward to seeing your next amazing renders, which undoubtedly will surprise everybody including you. Oh well, I will be so happy to take a look. Also, if you happen to watch this video on YouTube, press thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and feel free to share this video. I would really appreciate that. Let's just share it a million times and show the world how cool Blender is and what we can do with it. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. That was Gleb, Alexandrov for CreativeShrimp.com. Ooh, now it's over to you! Feel free to try this image-based lighting workflow and impress the world. Thanks for watching this freemium series of tutorials about image-based lighting in Blender. I hope your head is buzzing with the ideas. If you have already got the course, I'd like you to know that you have supported the rubber ducks all over the world. Thank you so much. Oh, and now we have plenty of coffee. I can caffeinate myself to death, but I wouldn't. Feel free to check this thing on Gumroad, all the links are in the description. It's freemium, so you can set your own price starting from 0 and up.